Okay, next up is letter D. We have 2 full columns of letter D, so this will be a little bit longer one. Starts off with Dan Swano's Moon Tower album, his solo epic album on Black Mark, which is just a great Dan Swano work. Next, an underground, mostly unknown band from France called Decay, and their Bound to Mutation Demo 91 is a great death metal release. Dargord from Austria and their debut In Nomine Eternitatis is mostly based on keyboard. It's got black metal influences, and it's a really good one to light up a bunch of candles and have a date over. Dark Sex and Death, another one I don't have the original pressing of, is another kind of a big rock sort of, but death metal epic as well. Dark Abbey is the band before Epitaph was formed out of Sweden, and this is their Blasphemy demo of 1990, and that's a really good one as well. Dark Angel is classic thrash metal from California, which kind of was the originators of kind of where the thrash scene turned into death metal. This was a good kind of turn point album on Combat Records. A must-own album for everybody is this We Have Arrived. Dark Millennium is a band from Germany, and they have an album called Ashore, The Celestial Burden. Dark Throne of Norway and their newer Underground Resistance album I think is really good. My favorite release is Ravishing Grimness, and I also have all these other ones. The classic Transylvanian Hunger, the Unholy Trinity is right here. The 3 albums that kind of really put Dark Throne on the map after they made this death metal album called Soulside Journey. Now this is a Peaceful Records release, and this is 100% pure death metal from Dark Throne, and if you're a death metal enthusiast, then certainly pick up Dark Throne Soulside Journey. Next we have Darkwell of Austria, and this is a really influential band for me. This is a shorter EP, and their full-length album is called Suspiria. Female-fronted band, and just really good songwriting. Next is Dawn of Decay, our Swedish death metal band, and their Grief demo 1992. A new album from Poland from the band called the Dead Goats is something that piqued my interest. Path of the Goat, check that one out. Deadhead from the Netherlands, The Feast Begins at Dawn, kind of death thrash. Dead Horse is a Texas metal band who went on with some albums. I prefer their demo. I really like this Death Rides a Dead Horse demo. The band Death from near the Tampa area, influential in fostering death metal from the very beginning. Here's my collection. I really like the Human Remaster, so I make sure you have the Human Remaster. I've had this one for years and years, and this is very impressive. You can finally hear the bass guitar. It's strongly recommended. I have a CDR that I made at home with the demos on it. I pulled out my favorites from the demos: Death by Metal, Infernal Death demo. I got the Full Mutilation demo, which I think is their best. And then I pasted on a track from Live in Philadelphia. Some of my favorite stuff. Stream Bloody Gore is my favorite death metal album of all time. Here's another one from Devil Metal Records that put out just a compilation of demos that turned out to be fairly decent. Death Angel and the classic thrash metal from California, strongly endorsed by people like Kirk Hammett, who produced their demo and their classic album called The Ultraviolence. Death Hammer is a newer band from Norway, and they're just tons and tons of fun, really bringing back to life the true spirit of metal. The Phantom Nights is just an instant classic for me. I think this is just a fantastic album. And look at the name of this demo, Savage Poser Hunt Demo. That is so cool. Death Row is a classic German band that's kind of left out. We always talk about Destruction, we talk about Creator and Sodom all the time. Death Row is another. There's tons of German bands that created speed metal, and Death Row is no exception. Raging Steel album is my favorite one, and their first offering was the Satan's Gift. These are both recently reissued. I love the German accent that you can hear through these. Deathstrike from Paul Speckman, who created the band Master, who was one of the first death metal bands. This Deathstrike predates Master. They're from the Chicago area, and this is an absolute fun listening and a death metal classics. Deathstrike, fucking death. You can't beat that album title and everything. This is recently put out. You got to get that one. Death Witch and their Demon Preacher album. I really like this old school sound Notice that most of my CDs are, in fact, old school. Death Wish, Demon Preacher. Decapitated, a bit newer on the death metal scene. I prefer the late 80s, early 90s stuff, and then Decapitated, of course, with Winds of Creation, created a really solid album, and then they had just had a really a burst of great songs, like The Eye of Horus. I mean, one of the greatest death metal songs I've heard. I also really like their Cemeteral Gardens demo. Make sure you search for this on YouTube. The demo from Decapitated. Deceased is one of the original death metal bands of America. They're from Arlington, Virginia, and they toured the country with hardships and had a final breakthrough after several demos dating way back to 1986 with The Luck of the Corpse. Finally, they released this classic death metal, Luck of the Corpse. A really great band. Some people will probably have more albums than I do here, but the first stuff is true old school death metal spirit. Decompose hopefully died. I'm looking forward to the reissue coming out in 2015. This is a band from the UK who is doing what we call, I don't know what kind of death metal you want to call it. Why don't you post in the comments for me? Deeds of Flesh, Gradually Melted, and Trading Pieces are my favorites by far. These guys also, after the original death metal scene kind of burst, and we had our classic Florida bands, etc. Deeds of Flesh was one of the ones that kind of spearheaded more of this brutal type of sound. And I think we can enjoy death metal now today because of these bands who through the late 90s kept pounding away and producing some really heavy stuff. So thanks to bands like Deeds of Flesh. Defecation is a grindcore release here. Now this is important because what we've got here is the two Harrises, no relation. This is Mick and Mitch Harris from Napalm Death originally, of course, and these two guys collaborated together, made a really great grindcore release called Purity Delusion. We have Mick Harris on drums right here, who is, I consider, the father of grindcore, one of the first guys to really kind of put that drumming style to really good use. And then, of course, screamer and ultimate guitar player Mitch Harris as his companion. Next we have kind of a hidden gem from Austria is Defleshed. They put an album on Metal Blade called Under the Blade. And here's the album cover for that. There's also a really cool Destruction cover that they do on this album too. Really low tuned, one of the first bands that were just kind of tuning and grinding that low, and it's a really great release, Defleshed, Under the Blade. A newer band, kind of suspicious, is this Decay, Death's Striking Wings, and it's a really great kind of blackened sort of death metal. I assume they're from Sweden. They don't have any names. They don't have any kind of like locations in here. It's all kind of, suspicious, under the gun, but a really good release. Decay, Degial, Death's Striking Wings. Dehumanize is New York, one of the first bands that invented the slam sound. You've heard of Internal Bleeding and Suffocation, and there's other bands, but Dehumanize was also one of the first ones to create that kind of New York slamming death metal style. Here is their Terminal Punishment demo, 96, also really good. Straight out of Tampa, Florida is the classic band Deicide. Serpents of Light is one of their classics, and Once Upon the Cross, and of course from the beginning up until Once Upon the Cross, is absolutely golden death metal material. Here's their first album here, the self-titled Deicide album. I hope you all have it. The reissue, or the original pressing sounds better without all that extra bass that they added to the remaster. So if you can get the original pressing, you're going to enjoy that Deicide album a bit more. Delirium from the Netherlands was one of the first kind of doom death bands, along with Disembowelment from Australia, and there's newer bands like Skepticism and Evoken who are continuing that doom death that Delirium and Asphyx from the Netherlands kind of started. This is an excellent album. I mean, talking like the vocals sound like John Tardy of Obituary, right? And the guitars sound like Celtic Frost. You put those two together and you got this band Delirium. This is an excellent release on Memento Mori, and I strongly recommend it. Demented Ted is kind of an underground American Chicago area death metal band. They put out a Promises Impure album, and it's scattered full of healthy riffs. Demigod and Demolic, I tend to categorize these together. They're both from Finland, and they put out, of course, Finnish death metal, the heaviest death metal in the world. Slumber of Sullen Eyes and Demolic's classic Nespith album looks like this. These are both released on Extreme Metal label, and there's a man named Dave Rotten in the world who assumably lives in Spain, who was very influential, met tons of characters back in the day. He's a big fan of Finnish death metal and has done the world a favor by releasing all of these old school Finnish death metal on his Extreme releases here. Here's their logo, Extreme Music. Make sure you get acquainted with that label. Next up, Demolition Hammer from New York City, New York. I have 2 reissues of The Tortured Existence and Epidemic of Violence. This is just kind of death metal with sort of a hardcore twist to it, a New York style death metal, if you will. Their Necrology demo of '89 is also something that you should check out. Depravity, Silence of the Centuries is more old school death metal. Decay is from the U.S. They were one of the original death metal acts. They were good friends with Immolation, and the members Sharon and Terry Hagen were together to form Decay. Later they hooked up with Mythic frontwoman, and she had gone on to do something like Demonic Christ and other bands, but there is a relationship between